Claire, and nice. afternoon. I'd like to call this special meeting of the Wilson County Board of Education to order. Please know that the meeting is being live streamed through the Wilson County Schools YouTube channel. The public can also view the meeting through the link on the Wilson County Schools Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter pages, and the Wilson County Schools website. Face coverings are required to be worn during the meeting. Please make sure you are wearing a face mask, and if anyone is in need of one, some are located at the back of the room, but we're all masked. Members of the board, we ask that you give us an approval of the agenda at this time.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Mercer?
I'd like to inquire as if we could amend the agenda to include a discussion, and I'm not asking because I want to approve or not approve, but for time's sake, regarding November the 12th, there's been a lot of talk about Mental Health Day or something of the sort. And if we're going to discuss that, I think we should discuss it before our next regular board meeting, which would put us on top of the 12th.
All right.
So do we need to have a motion for that?
First, I'm going to ask legal counsel, are we at liberty to amend the agenda at this point since it was given notice for the purpose of the long-range planning facilities, and would we legally be able to do that at this point?
The law does not support a change of agenda for a special called meeting because the public wasn't on notice for this subject matter. If you all wanted to talk about this subject, we could notice another special meeting 48 hours from now. The subject isn't even tangentially related to the issue at hand for today. So my recommendation would be to not talk about that subject today and properly notice another special called meeting if you all decide that is a subject you need to talk about. It has far-reaching implications for everyone too.
Well, since I'm not trying to promote it, I was just trying, if we were going to discuss it, and I'm not particularly in favor of calling a special meeting for that either, to be honest with you. I mean, I'll attend one and all that if that's what we need to do. But
Am I able to poll the board in regard to the request made by Mr. Mercer, or how do we handle that?
So in terms of polling the board for when another meeting could be held?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Members of the board, before the approval of today's agenda occurs, what is your pleasure in regard to the request made by Mr. Mercer related to a change of calendar date as being discussed?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Mercer?
again, I'm not suggesting we change it. I was suggesting that we discuss it as early as possible if we were going to do it. So,
Well,
I
given...
mean, it amounts to about the same, but
Given the comment from legal counsel and the time frame that you reference, it is the pleasure of the board to decide if there is to be a special call meeting for that purpose. And so I'm only trying to poll the board to see if they are interested in having a separate call meeting at this point for the purpose that you have stated.
Madam Chair,
Ms.
I
Boyd?
am not
Okay.
interested.
All right.
I'm partially on the fence, I guess. Yes, I could meet.
Okay, Mr. Boykin?
I would be willing to meet, maybe to discuss dates.
Mr. Breen?
I'd be willing to meet to discuss dates as well. I could meet at, I don't know what everybody else's schedule is like, but I could meet Monday at 4.
So it would have to be next week if we're talking about the 12th, correct?
it being 48 hours from now, unless we want to meet on Saturday, and I
Right.
know I don't want to do that.
I don't think so, Mr. Mercer. You may be available, but I don't think the rest of the board or the staff would be available for a
Wouldn't have a
Saturday
quorum by
meeting.
myself, would I?
Okay. Please note that our seventh member, Mrs. Powell, is now part of the meeting. Thank you. So, Mr. Mercer, you were like,
I mean,
I
if
will, I
there's,
won't,
I wanted to make sure I was not bringing it up to show I supported it or didn't support it, either way. But I will be willing to meet. If there's a meeting organized, I certainly will attend.
Just for the sake of everybody's clarity, and I hate to, because I know that we're being televised and broadcast, and we're all sort of beating around the bush. Could we be explicit as to what this other specially called meeting would be for?
The purpose, as I understand from the board discussion, is to examine the school calendar and specifically how November 12th is categorized. That's my understanding, and I think it sounds like all of you who have been polled are willing to meet, and the appropriate thing would be to have a meeting anytime after Saturday so that we could properly notice it.
I have a question of Dr. Wilson. We have been flipping days already, and we are quickly approaching our Thanksgiving holiday. Hours-wise, and we still have winter possibilities of inclement weather and the like. I know that the discussion is probably coming about because other school districts are now talking about mental health days. In a quick estimation from you who works diligently on the calendar, is a flip of a day reasonable? And when we have our hours that we have to meet in terms of the state, is this a potentially doable scenario? And I want to weigh in because I've had my other board members other than Mrs. Powell. I'm not interested at this point. I know that my other board members, and if they are willing, right now there is a 4-2, and I'm not sure if Mrs. Powell, who's just entering the fray, even is aware of what the discussion is. So I'm going to ask you and the administration if that is something that is tinkerable with at this point, because every time we have to tinker with the calendar, it creates other issues and implications.
When our calendar was created, we had additional hours added above the 1,025 hours that was required by the state. So we do have banked hours. I don't want to give you a number at the moment exactly because I didn't bring that with me.
Right.
So there are days and hours that are banked due to having sometimes inclement weather. We have not had significant inclement weather this year. However, yes,
Winter.
that could happen over the winter. And for our particular district, that's when typically the hours are usually used. There have been some years recently with hurricanes that we've had to use some hours, but when we polled about the trends from the past, the majority of our days or hours came from the winter time.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
Madam Chair, for Dr. Wilson, I don't have the calendar in front of me, so November 12th is an instructional day already, or is it work day? Is it half day for kids?
It is an instructional, regular instructional,
day.
face-to-face, full day, 6 hours
Okay.
of instruction.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Boyette?
I think that our next meeting is at November the 8th, that we could discuss a day, maybe the week of Thanksgiving, but that is, I will meet if we meet, but I see no need to call a special board meeting prior to our November 8th meeting.
All right. Members of the board, and Mr. Mercer, I heard your comment is the timing for the 12th. That is very close to our having a board meeting on the 8th, and if it is a matter of a day, then I think it would be up to the administration as to when that could possibly be. So I agree with Mrs. Boyette that possibly we can have this as a point of discussion for the full board meeting on the 8th of November for an alternate date other than the 12th.
I think if it's our intention potentially to grant some sort of mental health day, I think for the planning purposes of our families and the parents of our students, we need to give as much notice as practicable. Because even if we did do something Thanksgiving week, that still cuts us into 2 weeks before. And most schedules are 4 to 6 weeks out. And I know that could potentially put an undue hardship on a lot of our parents, like me, for example. But I know that there are other similarly afflicted families.
Then it might be that we just need this, since we are 4 to 6 weeks out and the schedule has already been changed, then it might be that we need to keep our calendar as originally slated at this point. Mrs. Barnes?
My question was going to be, if we wait until November the 8th, will it be a discussion item on the agenda, or will it become an action item?
That's a matter of positioning from the administration in terms of a recommendation, and then the board would have to act as to whether or not it's a discussion and or action.
Madam Chair, just want to make sure that I'm understanding. We are trying to decide when we're going to meet to actually decide on mental health day coming up.
For the consideration of,
Consideration of
not
mental
for, but for the consideration.
Okay.
And
Right now, we have 4 board members who are willing to meet, 2 who have indicated not being willing to meet. And you would either be on the prevailing side of, say, of 5 versus 2 or 4 versus 3. So, at any rate,
Okay.
can we have Mrs. Horrison poll the board members as to what date is available for them to be, for the board to be able to meet for even a discussion at this point, because we do have to move into the purpose of our called meeting today, which is our long-range facilities planning. Since that was just a point of discussion, it was not a thing for action due to the comment of legal counsel. And so, since 4 people are willing to meet, I'm going to ask Mrs. Horrison, would you please try to find the time? And if it is to be Monday, to let us know so that you have the correct time to post notice as required by statute. Thank you very much. Now, members of the board, I ask for an approval of the agenda as presented by the administration.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Mercer.
I move we approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
It has been moved by Mr. Mercer, seconded by Mr. Breen, that we approve the agenda as presented for this special board meeting. If you would now join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to be followed. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yep.
I'm trying to move us along. Are there any questions? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, please let it be known by the sign of aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Let the record reflect that the motion carries unanimously. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to be followed by a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. First of all, under my comments, let me welcome Olivia Neely. She is now our educational reporter for the Wilson Times. She and Drew Wilson, who has been ably reporting on our meetings, have swapped beats, from what I understand. And that Ms. Neely, who had been covering crime, is now going to be covering education, and Mr. Wilson will now be swapping and covering the crime beat. So I'm sorry I did not welcome you at the last board meeting. I did not know that the swap had occurred, but welcome to our meetings. Thank you. Members of the board, we are here now for really serious discussion as to planning and the utilization of our facilities. This is not something that we take seriously. This is something that we do take seriously. I'm sorry, I did not state that correctly. Woo! In my time on this board, we have had issues where we have discussed redistricting, which makes us move students from place to place. And now and that always raises the concerns of our public. And so now we are talking about the utilization of our facilities. I'm sure that there will be a lot of comment and interest, and we welcome that from our public. And so we know that some of our schools are overutilized. Some may be underutilized, but we look at the issues that are there. We have come to this point because our county commissioners have asked us to examine this, and as we have had a declining enrollment, this is a very reasonable request of us. So at this time, please make sure that you are attentive. I know that we have done a survey ranking certain qualities, and so now we're going to, I guess, begin to get into the meat of what goes on with this whole process. So I ask that you give it your full attention, and I'm going to ask Dr. Mills if he is now ready to begin as we move into the next phase.
Yes, Madam Chair, board members, and others. I brought some information for you. I know the folks from WARED also have some packets or some things they're going to show on the screen. This is a copy of the information from the March stuff at the land use, kind of the summary I did that pulled in stuff from the land use study and the forecast enrollment. So I want to hand those out, but I also wanted to point out a couple of things about today as these are going around. And I won't even take the time to put them up on the screen because we really want to focus on ORID's work today, but these are in your packet, but just for today, the things I wanted to point out are today's work is going to be, we've got this quick review of the information from the March meeting and the land use study and the forecast. So, yes, please, thank you. You've had this information, we've walked through that, and they may go through that. But they're also going to show our current kind of elementary school assignment maps. They've also got the middle and high school, but we're going to focus on elementary because that's where our needs are in terms of age of buildings, and looking at what we can do and where we need to focus. They're going to provide some recommendations. And remember, this is the starting point, and you're going to have to weigh in. The computer can only do so much. They're going to provide some recommendations, and we've met several times. It's been good conversations to look at scenarios and current assignments with changes, to look at things that could be tweaked based on the forecast, based on the utilization, that could involve consolidation as well as some assignment changes. And remember, this process is kind of ongoing and organic, so we've got some dates we want to talk before we're done today to schedule our next work session before we get out of here, because y'all know one of the most difficult things is finding a date with everyone's calendars right now. But it's going to be important once we start going through this information to keep on this and get this done. The community engagement process is one where, when I've talked to the ORED staff, they're recommending 2 scenarios to be able to present to the public. And we're looking at kind of a January time frame, because it's, we're really jammed up right now with November, December. We want folks to have time to see some things, and you're going to have time to work through some of the scenarios and information they present today. So when we're planning through this, if we think about what we have to do and what may come, we need to be kind of wrapping things up towards the end of February. That doesn't mean we implement anything next year, because it depends on what was involved in the scenarios or the decisions you make, whether it's consolidation or just reassignment. This might be different than what we've done in the past. In the past, we've simply done reassignment of students to schools. If you consolidate some schools, that might take some more planning and conversations to look at staffing and timeframes for things. So I just wanted to remind you, this part of the process is for you to kind of take a hard look at some things, and part of that feedback process is to give them that input so they can come back and bring you some refinements. But from what I've seen so far, and we've met a couple times online and had good conversation again, I think there's some good starting points for you today. But none of this is going to be a really easy process from just from a holistic standpoint. The computer can do it, the math will work, the assignments will work, no problem, but the personalities of the schools and your kind of approach to the communities and the students and your history will be a part of your decision making, and you need to remember that part of it can influence some of the processes we need to do. So it's going to be difficult at times as you go through this. So I think they've done a good job of getting some stuff ready for you to start taking a look at it. And of course, I've bragged on y'all for them, and they're a pretty good bunch. I have not had to yell and scream at them, but a couple times as they've gone along. Luckily, Joy and Terry are the worst ones, and they're remote, so we won't have to worry about them. But they're a good bunch, and I think you'll be interested to see what they've come up with. I think they did a pretty good job of starting point for you to have a conversation. Okay? I'll turn it over to Thomas Dudley with ORED.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mills. Dr. Fitch, other members of the board, I'm Thomas Dudley. As Dr. Mills just mentioned, I'm joined today by my colleague, Mr. Wall Wright. And this afternoon, we're going to be discussing the following topics here. First, some time has passed since we worked together, and I don't believe it was in person either, so we're just going to briefly reintroduce ourselves on one slide, and then we'll be discussing your membership trends quickly and how those trends have led to significant facility underutilization. We'll also be highlighting the potential ways to address that underutilization, and then we'll be handing it back over to Dr. Mills for a discussion of next steps. To talk briefly about us, ITRE is the Institute for Transportation Research and Education based on NC State's campus in Raleigh, and ORED is the Operations Research and Education Laboratory, which is a small part of ITRE that focuses on school planning, specifically school facility planning, as well as student assignment. All of the services that we provide fit under this framework, this umbrella called Integrated Planning for School and Community. And you're familiar with several of these deliverables that we have provided over the past year or two including the first 3 bullet points there. I will highlight the 4th bullet point, school site optimization. That doesn't necessarily just mean new school siting. It means looking at the configuration of current, excuse me. It also involves the examining mathematically the configuration of current facilities. We see here your membership over the past 6 years, and what we see is a decline of almost 2,000 students over this time frame. The last time we met with you all, we left you with several slides, and this was one of them, discussing or sort of highlighting the utilization or underutilization that you see in the district. Here we're highlighting the elementary school level. When we say utilization, again, what we mean is the number of students divided by the capacity of the school. So when you see underutilization, you have a lot of empty seats, and that's what we see in most of your elementary schools. Having a school or 2 underutilized is typical for most districts of your size, but there's a more pervasive trend where this is more generally the rule and not the exception to the rule. With that underutilization and the inefficiencies that come with it in mind, be aware that my team helps districts through processes such as these in this situation. You've seen forecasts from us looking at the school level, looking out over the next 10 years, but I'm going to introduce a new sort of deliverable that we provide in the next couple slides here, which highlights different scenarios, different attendance zones, and how things could look given consolidation scenarios. These maps speak volumes. They're powerful maps, and they can help you achieve your goals. So with that, we're asking you today to explore or review this exploratory assignment scenario for the elementary school level, and to continue to weigh your assignment priorities as have been presented before, and these are just several of them, such as balancing utilization, maximizing student proximity to school, facility age and condition, to skip to the end there. These are all critical factors, and you, as a board, are tasked with weighing these as we look at assignment plans. On the next slide, there's nothing controversial. This is your current elementary school attendance zones. And you currently have 14 elementary schools, and that utilization that we talked about is, at the system-wide level, is roughly 65%. Now, how do we go about this approach of sort of mathematically optimizing what's going on and doing it in a defensible way that really makes sense to all stakeholders? So what we do is really we start from scratch. We run the scenario of looking at, if you didn't have any schools at all, where would you first start placing schools? You've got downtown, you've got areas like high growth, areas like Jones, and there are other major areas in the north or in the west where you've got significant student population density, and you have schools that are currently well positioned to serve those students. So as you go through this process of iteratively building up the school district schools, one at a time, and examining the sensitivity of those school sites, you begin to get a picture of which schools are less well suited to serve the needs of the students that are there today and that will be there in the future. The last disclaimer I have before moving on to the first and really our scenario that we're going to be presenting today is to keep in mind that this is a big picture analysis. We're looking at the district-wide here. We're talking about major decisions, and there will be time for looking at street names and things like that, and I've provided a high-resolution, large format map that has street names on it, which can be explored as well. But for right now, keep in mind this is meant to be a big picture sort of perspective on things. So in this scenario here, which is what we're presenting today, we're calling it a preliminary scenario and draft 1. There will be revisions to this. There will be additional meetings. There will be additional discussion. What the initial sort of takeaways from this is it presents the closure of 3 elementary schools, Stantonsburg, Winstead, and Vic. Given the closure or potential closure of these 3 schools in this attendance zone scenario, your system-wide utilization at the elementary school level increases to roughly 80%, which gives you flexibility. It still gives you room. It still gives you seats where you need them. There's still hundreds of seats available at Jones, which is where you will need them going forward. Sort of flipping back and forth in between the slides, you can see that noticeable change in the southeast where Barnes is able to absorb the attendance zone of Stantonsburg. We also have downtown Vincent Bynum absorbing most of the attendance zone of Winstead. And the last sort of component and the last change that's noticeable as I flip in between these two slides is the dissolving of the Vic attendance zone and Hearn reaching down and absorbing those students. The sort of second, they're the bottom half of that orange in this particular map. I think there are basically no students there. There may be 0 students there. So it's really that northern part of the orange that we're talking about being reassigned to Hearn. But what this third school does is when we introduce the closure of Vic, that would also necessitate what we call a ripple effect, where you can see Barnes would not have enough room over on the east side of the Vic attendance zone, and it's absorbing Stantonsburg. On the western side, you have Vincent Bynum, which is absorbing most of Winstead, so it wouldn't have room to absorb any students from Vic. And then so Hearn, then logically, is the school that needs to reach down. And in order to accomplish that, though, there aren't enough seats there, so then Wells has to reach over to what is currently the northeastern part of the Hearn attendance zone. The note to the far left bottom is that we acknowledge that any of these scenarios, regardless of what step of the process they're in, they should be considered draft until your transportation department has the chance to review them for accessibility, student safety, and other logistical concerns. And what that means is if there's something that is drawn on the map here that is like an area that a bus could not safely get into and turn around in and get out, that should be excluded from the analysis. That's not the type of thing that the computer or I would have knowledge about. So please just wanted to, I always put that on the maps and on the slides too, to keep in mind that your transportation department has a role in this as well, explicitly. So I think Dr. Mills summed it up well when he said this is a starting point. This is meant to be the conversation starter as we look to the next slide, which is just a zoomed in version of the last one. This, to me, is more helpful to zoom in, to look at where most of the changes are, and then to have the blue lines here, which indicate the current elementary school attendance boundaries. So you can get a better sense of where the changes are actually proposed to be occurring. So as one next step, and I don't mean to steal Dr. Mills' thunder here, but just as one next step, as you look to explore this topic more, please, let us know if there are any additional information, data, or maps that we can provide. In terms of the speaking all that I did about utilization at the beginning of this presentation, the scenario that you see in front of you now does not overload any schools based on forecasted utilization. So the max would be about 90% of schools' capacity. So looking specifically at Barnes, for example, even giving the transfer of students from Stantonsburg into Barnes, that still would allow for some, for lack of a better phrase, wiggle room as you're looking at doing programming in that school, for example.
Will we get hard copies of this presentation?
I do not have hard copies with me, but I believe the district should be able to provide those. We can send those along, and the maps too.
If you send those to me, I'll get those to you.
Absolutely.
Yep, I'm printing a set out. I don't have them yet, but I'll get them to you.
And probably the most valuable tool moving forward will be that large-scale map that's a high-resolution PDF that you can go and zoom in on and look at specific streets and sort of ground yourself better than I know. It may be more of a challenge to do it from these maps, as typically is.
Question.
Yes.
So if we are at 65%, utilization now, and this suggestion would move us from 65 to 80. Is that
Correct.
correct?
Yes.
I think that the thing that you'll see in the work they've done, and from what they're sharing too, is doing the assignments is pretty straightforward in terms of getting kids in a school and finding some balance, which you set. You set what those parameters are. But the fact is, they've brought you a starting point now that has looked at increasing your utilization by around 15%, or 15 percentage points, and at the same time, your forecasted enrollment is not going to exceed any of your schools. That's the balance piece that you really need. So their numbers have been very accurate over time of what will be down the road. And doing these assignments now is fine, but doing them in such a way that they work now and down the line means you don't have to do this on a recurring basis to adjust for things that you didn't plan for, the growth. And if you look at what they've already pointed out, the western part, towards the Wake County side, now you've got some housing starts over there that you've seen from the land use study and things you brought to the table. It even takes that into consideration. So your forecasted enrollment, your growth patterns, your utilization is still under what you would need to handle that growth down the line. So what you don't want to do is do the assignments to say this looks really good, and in 2 years they're just out of whack again. So, and many of you have been through this process before. So you've done that balance. But from a starting point, this is for you to have the conversations about, well, what about this, what about that? But I think increasing the utilization that much and consolidation is going to do some things to allow us to have a conversation with commissioners about funding for facilities, but at the same time, you saved yourself from having to go back and adjust as we go because they've built in some buffers along the way.
So did I hear you say that this is draft one? Are we getting just this today, or are we getting something for comparison's sake at this point?
This is the deliverable that we have at this point, and we welcome the sort of next steps in the process, which will be incorporating input from the board specifically.
I personally would like to see a second draft, a comparative to what you have presented. As we have examined things in the past, we've always had a comparable. There is no comparable here. And I think that we need to have that for discussion's sake, to be able to say, well, this shifts better, this does not, whatever. I think there is a second draft that's required and a comparable that we can have. You can still call it draft one if you want to, but A versus B, whatever, something to compare with.
Understood. Very good.
Are there some pieces and parts that the board would like to see in scenario A or B that,
I don't want to see us get back into a scenario where we have large segments being on a bus having to be moved somewhere else.
okay.
And that becomes a big issue. We went from a very segregated system to an integrated system that was under court order, that required busing of our students. We finally moved away from the busing by court order again when we became a unified system, unitary system. I forget the technical
Unitary status.
terminology, but we
Tells it.
removed those requirements for busing. And I'm that person that needs those streets when you talk about your maps. Some people can
I
look
to-
at it, some
I
people,
told them that, but
Some
you
people
don't
can-
need to.
some people can look at a boundary and here's a railroad track and here's a creek. That doesn't work.
But there'll be some street names, but Ored's
So,
telling you the same thing I'd tell you, which is,
that's fine,
at
but
this level, we're just looking at patterns.
I'm still gonna ask for it.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
you're
and I'm
good,
doing
you're-
that now.
Yep,
So,
it's a street name.
I need to be able to look at streets and see that X Street is having to move all the way over here, and neighborhoods are important, and our locations are what they are, because the schools were built in a period, in a time when there was the segregation. They were built in a period and in a time when there is land utilization which kind of locks the schools into place, that there may not be options for movement somewhere else. And I'm sure that the people in Stantonsburg are going to say, but you're looking to close our entire school, and what about all of our children in the movement? And the same thing for those at Winstead, and when you look at Vic. And so I need to have a comparability to study, and that's my long and short, and to look at how far we're going to be busing. And I know that the transportation is not part of your consideration, and you said we have to consult with our transportation department. But we need some other variables, and how far are children having to go, and who's going to have to be on a bus to move hither, thither, and yon. To me, that it's terribly, critically important, and cannot be done with just that little map to look at.
We can likely get some data from Ored and talk to our folks in transportation, and depending on what we got, look at some generic routes to see the distance and some of the things. I'll take a peek at that.
So there are a couple options with that, speaking specifically to busing distance. I mean, travel distance was an input into this, but busing distance can be a very different thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
And over most of the history of the program, it's been we do the best we can with travel distance. But in more recent years, there's another group at ITRI, the TIM support folks that help with districts across the eastern part of the state, have been able to help us out with estimating travel times for potential scenarios like what you're looking at in front of you here, thinking specifically about Stantonsburg and what does that mean in terms of ride times. So that's something that can be internal, or we may have the potential to help on that side.
Yeah, if they can do that, that would be, they've done some things like that, that would be helpful. This is the kind of feedback that Thomas and his team need to know to go to the next steps. Ms. Boyd has her.
Ms. Boyd, I'm sorry.
No, and they will having worked at Stantonsburg as principal, also, they'll have the same data. I mean, they own 2 buses now or 3. In other words, they already have limited buses, so their routes are broad because of the mileage that they cover. You understand what I'm saying? Or do you say that we're comparing what they are now with what they would be then? In other words, they have some
Comparability of route time now versus what that might be,
yes,
even though the geographic area is larger.
yes,
Would be. Yes,
because
ma'am.
if they had 4 buses, they would have real short
Yeah.
time. But
Yeah, we can look at that. I think the good thing about working with ORED is just what Thomas brought up, is their partners are the same ones that we use for many other aspects of our school systems, kind of infrastructure pieces, and so we can work through that. So again, these are the kinds of things that the board needs to articulate, because as you get that information, that's going to help you get closer to working through the scenarios and making some decisions. But what data you need, you say, then we can get there.
I have a
Ms.
comment.
Barnes and then
Go ahead,
Mr.
Ms.
Mercer.
Barnes.
It just appears to me that Stantonsburg to Barnes, the distance from those 2 schools is a lot more than it would be from Winstead to Vincent Bynum, because they're pretty much in close proximity. So that's the problem I kind of have with this draft. And then I guess this is down the road, but just thinking about closing a particular school, how do we go about utilizing those buildings for something else? Would it be something we consider making still part of Wilson County Schools? Thinking about right now the tech department is over
Yes.
as a part of Darden.
Mhm.
Could one of those become a hub for technology? You know, I'm thinking about the utilization of those schools that are being closed.
Yeah. There's some give and take of that I think we need to discuss. One piece is, part of Winston is a newer building. Another part you've deferred maintenance on for the windows and such because it is older and needs a lot of work. And you do have a department like technologies out in Darden. You've got a lot of capacity at middle schools that could be used in different ways. Of course, that's not what we're focusing on right now, but those are newer buildings and they're there. But if you were to take and reallocate some of those buildings for something else, the issue you're going to run into is you're still not reducing some of your overhead on your capital costs, which is affecting what's happening as I plan the budget and plan the staffing and plan the cost structure from the county commissioners. They can point out, and rightfully so, they give us a good allocation for the population we have, but what's going to cause us problems down the line is as our enrollment has declined and settled. Of course, the pandemic has thrown everything, who knows what the pattern is. Planning for dividing that funding across that many sites is doable, and I think we've done a pretty good job of balancing all that out. But what you run into, if you don't reduce that capital cost, then we're still trying to make it work with, enhancement teachers. We need 27, we only get 24 from the state. And then when you have very small schools that you're trying to balance out, that degrees of freedom is not there. So then you got to balance Title I comparability with your actual state allocations. It's not like at home, I've got this much money in my budget, I can pay this bill, this bill, this bill. We've got all these kind of pieces and parts, but it's affecting what we can do to provide for staffing elsewhere and manage class size requirements, which are 18, 16, 17, 17, on the money. So whereas we might have had plus or minus 3 or a district average, now we're having to go in and give an extra teacher, which is a fine thing to do. The problem is we're running out of extra positions to give because our enrollment's down, and we've had to give extra here and there to balance, so you lose that freedom. So I think what we're looking at is as you consolidate, you're paying insurance, you're paying maintenance, you're paying overhead, and other things on those facilities. We need to be really careful if we take over part of that facility and use it on an ongoing basis, because the goal is to get newer facilities that are more efficient, that will allow us to fit them in the puzzle where we need them for our students, and allow us to use our funds more efficiently, so that we don't get caught in this thing for the next 10, 15, 20 years. So it's very challenging right now to do all that. And that's really what we're seeing in school systems across the state. I think we spend a lot of time now for next year to plan for what we need to do, but that's what we're seeing is some of the smaller schools, it's really difficult. They've already got combination classes and trying to balance it out, and it is not easy to balance out the staffing, and doing some of these things like that would allow you to have some freedoms. And the other piece is to simply have teachers to go in those positions as the teaching pool has gotten smaller. I mean, you're also helping with that. So I just caution us as we go through this to think about how those buildings would be used. Yes, there's some parts that would be really good, and I think you could make a case for pieces of them. But we would not want to keep all of them going in some fashion for something else. Otherwise, we're just deferring what we need to get out of it, this process as well too, which is you want to be able to go and say, we've done this, this, and this, please help us do X, Y, and Z, and talk about that with the commissioners. Because they've made it clear that's what they want to do to help us. So I think that's a good conversation piece to have, but first, you got to go through this process.
Another question I had, and it's not dealing with numbers, but it's dealing with safety.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, you know, when I look through the previous documents we've gotten, nothing seems to be mentioned about safety. It may not have anything to do with the ORED, but I look at the communities around some of the places we're talking about sending children. Some things could be done to make it more inviting, so it's environmentally and aesthetically attractive to parents wanting to send those kids to a different school.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, we've done some of that with some of the work we've done just on the beautification, the walk up to the schools and all, but the safety piece just in the new design of buildings right now. You know, we talked about this before, schools weren't designed to keep people out, schools were designed to invite people in. Plus, what we're talking about too is think about all the HVAC issues we're dealing with from a pandemic standpoint right now, and the efficiencies that we would have. So, you know, we've been very fortunate. We've got lots of new healthy roofs on our building. That sounds silly, but that's a big ticket item that can affect the whole structure. But there's other things that we can certainly articulate for and see a real need for. But the first thing is we've got to have some really hard conversations about what is it that our district's going to look like and where it's going to be based on the data to get to that next step.
And I guess I wasn't, Dr. Mills, talking about the environmental, the looks of the schools, because we have done a lot for safety.
Yeah.
I'm basically, and I won't name a school, talking about the surrounding area
Yes.
around it
Yes.
would be of concern maybe to some parents.
Yes. I mean,
Talk about moving
you're going to have these conversations as you go through this process. You're because what they're going to do is based on what the data says. These are your options, and then in that point the computer stops. You know, when we've done this before, there's blank spaces on the map. It doesn't know what to do because there's too many inputs. So now what do you want to do? But all the things you're bringing up are things that will help them refine and bring back something else. Scenarios for you to say, I like this one or I don't like this part of that. Can it be combined?
All right, Mr. Mercer?
I had someone that's sits on the city council and/or not one person, but the county commissioners. They asked, were we considering is it industrial park? And Mr. Boykin would probably know more about this than me, towards Stansburg, and how that might impact housing in the future. Now, I can see how it might impact the future, but I think it's going to be, there's been so much growth on the western side of the county. That might help promote some, but I think we've got some years left on the growth on the western side, probably. But they drew a correlation between how Knightdale used to be and how it is now because of industry and growth and so forth. And I didn't know if that was something that had even been considered or not considered. But they were looking at it saying they felt like at some point there was going to be growth on the eastern side of the county. And he felt like we should be considering that. It may be 5 years, it may be 25 years. I don't know. And I don't think he knows either. And Mr. Boykin, you keep your finger on the pulse more than I do as regard to growth and where it might be and so forth. But I just wanted to mention, it was mentioned to me and I wanted to pass it on for thought.
I thought that was something that was considered in the March presentation that they
It
gave us.
may have been. This was brought to me when.
We did
Just
include it
recently.
as part of that analysis. We did.
the land use study looked at that too.
That's correct.
Yep.
Can I just tie on to what Mr. Mercer was saying?
Yes.
So, when was the last time you updated the land use study?
Let's see, so you have the document in front of you now. So,
That was in,
let's see, if we still have Mr. Carlson on the line, Terry, do you have that in front of you?
Yeah, I'm here. We started a lot of the residential data collection last summer, in summer of 2020, is when we met with local officials to collect the residential land use development information, which informed a lot of this.
So, yeah, I'm looking at the subdivision and development names that you've got up here, and yeah, I've written down 4, 5 right here that are not on this list. You know, one of them, D.R. Horton's going to be building out in Stantonsburg that I think is over 200 homes. They've just announced in the Triangle Business Journal another 300 homes going out on 264, like you're going to Sims. I've got a subdivision in Sims at 62 homes called Stapleford Park. We've got another subdivision that's 71 homes between Sims and Lucama. Another subdivision that's 9 homes in between Sims and Lucama. And none of these are up there, and I mean that totals to what, a little over 600 homes just in what's not on this study. And if we know that there's going to be 200 plus, maybe even 300 homes going into Stantonsburg, and it may, that subdivision might be driven by the industrial park that's on 58. I wonder if that would change your capacity levels at Barnes. If you're already at 80%, if you get a sticker shock of another, just call it 300 homes there, will that put Barnes into the red?
So I certainly appreciate the question and the thought process here. So it's a difficult process to sort of work in the space, because as soon as you create a document, there are additional developments that come online. That's the case in every district that we work with. And so we're talking about major subdivisions all over the place. Far east, far west of North Carolina, everywhere in between. There's this, and then of course you throw COVID in there too. We know COVID's going to reduce birth rates, especially for 21, and looking forward to, and that's going to further decrease some of the kindergarten cohorts that then move all the way up through the system too. So there are a lot of moving pieces. I can certainly appreciate the point, and we do like to be aware of those developments whenever they do come in. However we can incorporate them into this analysis to the extent possible, we will. But I would certainly not advise, doing another land use study or something like that. I know that's not exactly the conversation where we're going with that, but I just wanted to make that point.
yeah, I think, having done this in the past, and when we talked about this before, the land use study was to kind of set the foundation for, here's what your patterns look like. And they are coming up all the time. You've done a great job of pointing out some things, and we rode the roads and looked, and there's stuff everywhere, stuff I didn't even have any idea would be popping up where it is. The good news is you could add some in, but I don't think it would change the overall pattern. And because it's still happening in some of the same areas, you still got a buffer in some of those utilization pieces. But if we do know there's X number of homes in an area and can feed that to them, then we can hold back some capacity in a particular spot, if you know that's there, but it's always a moving target for some of that as we go along. But I think that we're still seeing the growth in certain areas where we're gonna be jammed up if we don't. And I still think your biggest issues are, what are we gonna do with the fact that we've got such low utilization in older buildings that we need to make decisions on the facility improvements of. It's gonna be hard to do that if we don't make some decisions about what's a priority.
Well, I mean, I certainly agree that, you know, the numbers are the numbers.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it's just math. I would like to give y'all at least these ones that I know off the top of my head, just in case
That'd
it
be
were
great.
to affect
Perfect.
your numbers, and I understand this is preliminary, so thank you.
That'd be great.
Mrs. Boyette?
To follow up on what Velma was asking about the buildings, there's nothing, now, make sure my understanding is correct. If we close a building, then it goes back to the county. Then there's nothing that would keep us, like with Adams, a community center or some organization buying it, purchasing it, probably for a very reasonable rate.
Yeah.
And turning it into a community center or something of that nature. And that is what I would hope that would happen with, you know, some of our facilities. But there's nothing that would stop that would happening. My analogy is, if you have a fleet, we have a fleet of schools, just like you had a fleet of cars, and only a few of them are new, and they're giving trouble, and your drivers, you don't have as many people driving. You've got to at some point say, listen, I've got to get rid of some of these cars so that I can get my costs under control. And we can still have enough to accomplish everything need to do as far as serving students.
All right, Mrs. Powell?
Thinking about what Mr. Borkin just said about the other subdivisions that are being built, we shouldn't be so quick as to decide to make such a major decision that's going to impact a lot of people, a lot of students. The thought of busing students from one location over to another location, I have a problem with because of, as mentioned, safety. I know at one point in time it's been a few years ago, but they actually bused students because they were looking at the integrating more students in certain schools. And that lasted for a while, but that caused students to have to get up like at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock to have to catch the buses. And that was just ridiculous. I remember that because my kids were in school, but luckily, fortunately enough, they didn't have to do that. But I think we need to just kind of slow our roll down a little bit and look at it, make sure we have I know that you're saying that with the number of teachers we have, that there is, I don't think changing students from one school to another is going to solve the problem of having problems finding teachers and substitute teachers. Because when you move students from another school, you're still going to need a certain number of teachers to teach those students. But closing schools, I'll admit, I'm probably the only one here that has a problem with that, but Stansburg, Winston, and Vic Elementary Schools, I taught at all 3 of those schools, and they are very dear to my heart. And the thought of closing those, and the community schools, Stansburg's community school, Vic is, Winston is, and they are pretty much, the students and the parents in those neighborhoods are pretty much, they rely on those schools in those neighborhoods. I know when I taught at Stansburg Elementary, there were some teachers there, Ms. Shackelford, Ms. Shelberton, they'd been there for years and years and years, and I remember them telling me, said, Ms. Powell, if you have any problems with any of your students, let me know, because I taught their grandparents, or I taught their great-grandparents. So when you have schools in districts like that, it's special to those people. I mean, I know we have to look at the money, I know we're looking at the numbers and all of this, but we need to think about the safety and consideration of those certain communities and those parents and those students that have been there so long. And, and I know we're thinking about, I really do think we need to look at another scenario or something, to look at some other, because it seems like this is just so direct. There's nothing else that's being you know, that's allowing us to choose any other type of situation to look at or any other scenario. But I think we just kind of need to slow down a little bit, not move as fast. And East Wilson, as we're now one Wilson, as our mayor tells us, we're not east and west. So we're supposed to be pulling together and moving together and building up our schools together. And we're supposed to be, which we did at Vic Elementary. We did a lot of improvement there. That school went from, C to A in a matter of months, I think. And it impacted a lot of people, and people were proud of it, and I was proud, because that's actually, I don't live too far from Vic Elementary School. So my concern is the safety of the students, the busing of the students, closing schools down. We don't have all the information or input that we need for the surrounding areas, and hopefully there's more places that will be built on the east side of Wilson. It depresses me, I'll just go ahead and be honest with you, the thought of closing schools instead of trying to keep them and trying to renovate them, to make them look better, to make our areas, our communities better, so we can bring more people into our communities. Because sometimes people will come from other areas and other counties, and they'll look at certain schools and they'll what to say, well, I want to go to this school because I like the way this school looks. And they'll decide to move from one area to another. So, and then I think about the larger communities that are always building more and more schools, like Wake County. They have people, they're always building schools. So I'm trying not to get too emotional about it, but I'm just having a little difficulty with this, Dr. Mills. So.
Sure. Again, this is a starting point based on information that you've gotten from your forecasts, from your land use study, and options. I think what Oridge's going to need to hear is, so what do you want the other scenarios to incorporate? Really, and have those conversations. Some of the things the board's talked about has been distance and travel, or if it's not about closure, then what is it? So I think y'all need to share some while they're here about what are the other things that they need to build the scenario around, because they don't know what inputs to give it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think, and because they're going to take, this is the mathematical model of, if you want to increase your utilization, then you can do that. You can go from 65 to 80 by looking at these schools and consolidating them and making these line changes. Then you could go back and look at your routes and look at these other things. So that's always, it could be tweaked here or there. That's no problem. All right, so now what is it that you want to see instead of that?
Can I ask another question, Dr. Mills? Were we thinking about looking at how much it would cost to renovate these schools? Were we going to do that at one point in time?
We've got some cost factors on that too, and so I think if that's the next step, then the board needs to talk about that too. I just think whatever we're going to do, they need to be provided some information about, if you're going to retrofit some of those schools, then we need to figure out how do we use them efficiently, because again, our utilization is so low because our population has shifted over the last 5, 6, 7 years. Are there some changes you need to make as you do that? Because some of your assignments, you've got growth and land use studies over here, you don't have here, you're still going to have to make some tweaks. So how do you want to make those tweaks based on the forecast that the housing starts are over here on this side of the county, or is it distance to school, or is it neighborhood schools, or, I think you got to start verbalizing what those things are and giving some input so they can go back and bring some scenarios like that.
And part of the expense, even when you do have the money to renovate a school, if you keep them all open, there's an added expense in staffing them with. Although teacher-wise, it takes X number of teachers to work with X number of students. But when it comes to other personnel and the maintenance of those buildings, is the expense too, but, I had a question. When boundaries change, do you take into account, natural barriers, the rivers, the major roads, the railroads, and things of that nature?
So computationally, the model itself does not, but that's something that we always like to examine afterward and clean up and make sure that it does go along the railroad boundary. I know there is one place on here that does, for example. So it is
And
something
I
we're
asked that-
certainly aware of, yes.
Excuse me, I ask that because, when they do change, it adds a whole additional dimension. Like if it goes down a street, this side's gonna have to move to this place, and you know that scenario. But natural barriers sometimes helps avoid splitting subdivisions and things like that.
I think in the past, when we have looked at redistricting, those are some of the considerations that have been made, a railroad track or a creek or a major highway or that presented a safety factor. I think that was part of the equation that was looked at as we have shifted with redistricting, if I'm not mistaken.
And that's what Mr. Dudley was talking about as well, too. There's areas where we know buses can't go down and turn around. They'll adjust the boundaries around that. And those are the areas where we would know.
I had to do some work with something similar to this, and it was before all the computers and all that stuff. And we had a node map that took a confined area boundaried by natural boundaries, and you included how many students you had at grade levels, and then you put nodes together to make districts. It was predicting, but that was old turn to crank by hand play.
So,
I just wanted to apologize to Oreo because I was reading this, couldn't see it from a distance, but it does mention student safety in this particular scenario, so I apologize for that. So I have a question. If this is the first draft and you're going to have transportation to look at it, and Dr. Fitch had mentioned a second draft where we have street names. All right, that's a two-step process. When does parent or public input take place in this scenario? Or in this process, not scenario?
So the street names will be provided on a map that I have on my flash drive right now. So you'll have that for the scenario that's in front of you now. As far as if there being a sort of draft 1A and draft 1B, that's just based on the feedback that we hear as part of this meeting, certainly. And just to speak more to the community and the community engagement aspect, Mr. Wright, did you want to speak to that?
I think our plan for our schedule is once we have some scenarios, we've gotten feedback from you, so we've kind of have gone the next step, is to present them, I think in January we're talking about, have some public meetings and virtual meetings, have a survey and have discussions with the community to present them, get their feedback, and kind of use that to hone further what you want.
Okay, thanks.
So that's definitely an important part of this, that community engagement.
Mr. Breen?
Well, I take this information for what it's titled as being, which is preliminary elementary scenario draft 1. I think we've given more more things for these folks to consider and weigh and meet out, and we've got things that we are concerned in meeting out. And I mean, right now it's just information. We're not closing anybody right now. We're not moving anybody right now. But what we are is trying to consider the best way to utilize the facilities that we have and our assets. I was one of those kids that was bused in the late 90s from Cardinal Drive all the way to Margaret Hearn, passing 3 elementary schools on the way to elementary school. And it was not fun or ideal. But, you know, as a kid, you don't know any better. They just tell you get on the bus, you get on the bus. And I know that there are parents who will vehemently object to saying just put them on the bus. I see some definite concerns with transportation, especially if Winstead is to be subsumed by Vincent Bynum, knowing that Winstead Elementary has the majority of their students get to school by walking, and they are not going to walk anymore because I don't think they're going to cross Ward Boulevard or walk down Downing. I think the only one that we had major concerns of were folks who decided they wanted to get biscuits
Yeah.
and getting too close to Ward Boulevard. But I think this definitely will require some tinkering and some further consideration before we take any actual hard steps forward. But I do think it's important to consider what our capital costs are and what the potential negative impact of continuing to spend money on capital funds on schools that are underutilized. 65% is a shocking number. And I think for me, it becomes a matter of whether or not, or what the potential capacities for these schools would be, given new growth and development, particularly on the eastern side of our One Wilson.
Did you have anything else to add, Mr. Boykin?
Not. Yeah, I will just say that, you know, we've got to get the utilization up. And I know that that's probably going to come through some school closures. And I understand that. It's just working through and figuring out what's the right fit for the community. So, I'd just like to thank y'all for everything that y'all put into it. Thank you.
Other points to be made? It's a lot of sentimentality that goes into this, just as every time we have changed the redistricting lines.
It's pretty difficult.
Most of you haven't been through even redistricting, but yet to be involved in a conversation for potential closure. I will tell you that the public will be out in support of their places. If you're not prepared for that, get prepared. Sentiments will run high with whatever decision that we make. So that when I started out with the comments that this is very serious, it is. We have the emotional attachments. We have memories of when we were here, there, or anywhere. But the county has tasked us to find better utilization of our facilities. And so it's a hard decision, and I know that we have already been faced with hard decisions, as you have said on this board, but this is one of the hardest ones that you will be faced with. And it's not an easy task, but I think that when we asked ORID to bring us other options, we have to really consider what's there, what is the best use of what we've got. I don't think we'll be building very many new schools. We're not Wake County. Wake County does a lot of building because they have a lot of growth. And their growth demands new facilities, and every time they are building a new school, if you watch the news, you always see that there is a lot of public sentiment involved there as well in moving children, because we are dealing with people. If it were as easy as just closing a building and that was it, we'd have no problem. But we are affecting the lives of families, of children, of communities. when we split a neighborhood, on one side of the street you go here and one side you go there, it's not easy. And so to even consider having to close a facility now, it's difficult. So I don't know if we've answered some of the things and some of the requests and some of the demands that are being felt by members of the board at this point, to give you further marching orders for clarification. But I certainly hope so. And I hope that because you're looking at a potential timetable of January for being able to begin the community engagement piece, members of the board, that means we're going to be shifting our calendars and schedules in order to be able to meet to give feedback, because this is now, for all intents and purposes, November, because the month ends on Sunday and November begins on Monday. And we have holidays that are coming in between. So I thank you on behalf of the board for the work that you have done thus far. I think we're going to be seeing a little more of you in the short time to be able to bring us back some of the things that we're asking for. Members of the board, I want you to be able to have a flexible calendar, because it's going to mean that we're going to have to get together to be able to get the answers and whatever. So I'm going to ask if there are any other comments or questions that need to be made at this point. And I'm going to ask you, sir, and members of the ORAD team, Mr. Dudley, if you have any specific questions for the board in helping you to go back to the drawing table before you get to come back to us.
I appreciate that. I have no additional questions at this time. I appreciate the input.
Okay. Dr. Mills?
I've got copies of ORAD's presentation,
Okay.
so I got those. I'll get any other information they share with me to y'all by email or printouts. And then Linda will reach out to you. We've got 5 dates here, so we'll reach out with a doodle poll to do dates.
Okay.
You can do it now, but my guess is it's going to be horrific if we don't just do. But it's the board's pleasure.
Members of the board, if you have your calendars
We can
ready,
do it right
rather
now.
than having Ms. Horrison try to run everybody down and get contact, if there are dates that are available, if you will begin to look at your calendars now and see if we can set a date before we walk out of here today.
Madam Chair, I don't have my calendar.
You do not have your
I
calendar.
have my calendar.
Members of the board, I'm going to ask you that when you come to the meetings, please have a calendar available for you.
That was your freebie.
I knew that was
Yeah,
coming.
that was a good try.
Because we are now in short rows in times of when the question was asked, when are you planning to do community engagement pieces? And I think that usually we have always something that's going to come up before us that we need to look at our calendars. But I'm going to ask Dr. Mills so that you can have these dates and you can respond immediately back. For those of you who have your calendars, I'm going to ask you to pull them out. Ms. Powell, I know you don't have yours, but if we look at some dates now and see what we can do,
And Ms. Horrison has cleared these with ORAD folks, because remember, they're working with other boards too, but they like us best.
that's so wonderful.
Just so you,
Now, just don't
so you know.
go to those other boards and then tell them you like them, because then everybody.
I don't even know who they are, but,
Privy, okay.
but I know they like us best.
First of all, we'll find out.
Yeah. All right, so here are the dates. All right, Tuesday, November 9th, 4 p.m. or later. I'm gonna give you all the dates and y'all take a peek.
All right,
Monday, November 22nd, after 12 p.m.
Okay.
Tuesday, November 23rd, after 2:30.
Okay, you're talking faster than I can write. Okay, what was the, after the 22nd? I know.
After 12
Yeah.
o'clock on
Tuesday.
the 22nd,
Okay, I got that one.
Tuesday, November 23rd,
after 2:30.
after 2:30. I'm not gonna talk anything because I got musketeers out of it. Tuesday, November 23rd, after 2:30. All right, everybody with me? There should be 3 dates.
Yes.
All right, fourth date, Monday, November 29th, after 12. And finally, Tuesday, November 30th, at or after 3.
The only conflict I would have out of those several dates is the 29th.
Okay, we got one conflict on the 29th. I feel like the Jeopardy music should be playing. There you go.
The 23rd would be best for me.
Here, 23rd.
So are we choosing
Okay, the
a
November,
number or all of these dates?
we're looking at the best one. Now,
Just
we're
get
not
one.
looking all of
Okay,
these dates.
just
Pick
one,
one.
Just
okay.
get one.
Now, Tuesday, the 9th is the day after
Our
our
board
next
meeting.
board meeting.
Yeah, I
I
knew
need a
y'all,
break.
I knew y'all would love that, so.
The 23rd would work for me.
Is there, 23rd, I will do my best. The 22nd didn't work for people, you said,
The
hadn't heard.
29th is the only day that I have a
Okay.
conflict.
29th is not good for Mr. Breen. Mrs. Boyette has a problem with the 23rd.
well, and I will do my best, don't,
Okay.
Tuesdays and Thursdays are.
Okay, Monday the 22nd, does that, and I know Ms. Powell can't respond yet. Mr. Borkin, on the Monday the 22nd, does that work for you?
I can make that work.
All right, Ms. Barnes, does that work for you? Mrs. Boyette, the 22nd works for you?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Breen, the 22nd works for you? Mr. Mercer, 22nd works for
Of
you?
all the days, yes, it'll work.
I knew you were playing because I was going to stab you with this pen.
Oh, no,
We're
no,
still
no
on
vi- No
TV.
violence, no violence.
By
I
the way,
wasn't going to stab you with this pen.
Okay, the 22nd works for me. Mrs. Powell, if you can please let Mrs. Horrison know if Tuesday the 22nd works for you. Then we may have a consensus at this point of the 22nd. And can, just for the sake of argument, can we have an alternate in case the 22nd does not work for Mrs. What about Monday the 29th?
That was,
Yes.
that's the one day. I
That's
got
the one
stuff.
date that you cannot, okay. And Tuesday, I was looking at Tuesday, that's Ms. Boyette.
you said you could do the 23rd. On the 23rd, if we could go a little bit later in the day,
Well, they said anytime after.
after 2:30. Yeah,
2:30.
okay, and if you say 4 o'clock, I can do it then.
Everybody got
Is that
conflicts
okay?
that day too?
So, our options right now are Monday, the 22nd, after 12 o'clock, or Tuesday, the 23rd, around 4 o'clock.
Okay.
And Mrs. Powell is going to consult her calendar,
Well, good job, y'all.
and Ms. Horson, that keeps you from having to, since we're all here together. Any other questions, comments? Mr. Dudley and ORED staff, Mr. Wright, Mr. Carlson, Ms. Davis, we thank you for the effort. We know you're going to put as much more effort into providing us a little more clarity. We thank you so much, and if there is nothing else to claim our attention, I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
Madam Chair, I move to adjourn.
Second.
It has been moved by Mr. Breen, seconded by Mr. Mercer, that we adjourn. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, let it be known by the sign of aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Let the record reflect that the motion carries unanimously. We are now adjourned.
It feels so good to do it all in one go like that. call.
It is nice, isn't it? I
Did we
agree.
say what time on the 22nd? We said
We
after.
just said after 12.
12,
Is
but
there
we didn't say
is
a
there a
time.
time that works better for everybody,
Let's-
other than Ms. Powell not knowing yet?
Let's do it at least after lunch, I mean, one.
One sound
Let's
good.
get
One-
time
once
to
is
eat,
pretty-
yeah.
One sounds.
Dad's got the time for them to get
John's
in.
Elementary School lets out 2:45.
Bring your calendar.
You've got 12 minutes.
12 minutes.
Are you
You better